I thought it was kind of interesting when Laura and Rachel asked me to come and speak to kind of wrap things up, because I'm not a humanitarian. I never have been. Kind of fell into this space due to kind of a technology we built that was actually old hat technology by the time we built it. There's nothing special about it. And that's why it underscores one of the things that was said earlier, and because I can't remember who said this, it's not actually about the technology, it's actually how it's used that's important, right? And I think if there's anything, that's what should be the takeaway for everybody here who's not a technologist, is that sometimes we think too much about the technology and not enough about how we use it. So as I was madly trying to scribble my thoughts and synthesize everything from the day, I was thinking about this title, about what is CDAC, Communicating with Disaster-Affected Communities. I'm like, well, I think maybe the most disruptive thing about this is that it's actually now communicating by and with the communities. And that's what's disruptive, is that they actually have a voice. And that's what we had unwittingly tapped into as Ushahidi 4 years ago, is that this group had a voice. And it came from the bottom up. And that was disruptive. Now, I think, if you look at not just the humanitarian space, but also maybe media or big media and government, you'll see that each of these types of sectors or industries are legacy by design, and that they were designed decades or centuries ago. And they were designed for a special purpose at that time. So what's happened now is that we have this really disruptive new force, the internet, mobile phones, this type of technology that is changing that, and it's eroding the foundation upon which these media and humanitarian and government sectors stand, meaning that they need a new form. And so the big question, I think, which is more disturbing, is not the technology, but how does it affect your organization, and why and how do you need to change because of it? And it's not an easy thing to answer. Nobody has an answer for it. I mean, the media sector has been on this kick for the last 10 years, being disintermediated. They're well ahead of you, right? They've been doing this for a long time, and they're still feeling the disruptions, and media companies are dying, magazines are going away. And so what's going to happen in the humanitarian industry is the same thing. We're going to see things change. We're going to see organizations die. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that it's time for this organization's or this industry's change as well. I had a really good conversation with it's Mark, right, at my table about what is humanitarian response, and it's really about being good at logistics, right? And that it's very command and control based. And so what happens when you no longer have command or control? I don't know. I mean, I don't think any of us do. But that's the kind of question that you have to ask about what you're doing on the ground. When you guys are actually on the ground trying to get rice to a certain village, what does it mean when they're actually communicating around you? And there was a comment made earlier asking, for people to, help decrease the amount of chatter that's going on out there because it's confusing. And the problem is that ship's already sailed. It's going to keep, it's happening, it's going to continue to happen. So instead, we have to look to technology, which caused this problem, to help solve it. So we have this information overload. How are we going to use technology again to bring all that together? I think it was John who was talking about the need to use both machine-based algorithms and people. And we at Ushahidi 100% believe the same thing. How do we use both sides? Because as much as people in the disaster-affected areas are trying to solve the problem, so are their family and friends who live elsewhere, and as well as you. So how are you going to use them? How are you going to use the diaspora? How are you going to use individuals who are outside of that network? So in Haiti and in Japan, we saw the crowd coming together and sending information into a single system, right, or a couple different systems. But it didn't just stop there. We saw the crowd from around the world come together on top of that and say, hey, how can we edit this information? How can we curate this information so it's more valuable? And we're going to see more of that. And so the question is, how are you plugging into that as an organization as well? How are you using your broader network, not just the local network? There's a couple comments around horizontal versus vertical scaling, which I think is actually a really important point. again, based on this legacy kind of structure that these organizations have been built on, we're used to, big horizontal scale where we have this monolith of an organization or monolith of an industry. And so we can take that focus off the humanitarian industry a little bit. Let's look at finance, right? It was made to be so efficient. Vertical scaling was so strong that if one piece broke, the whole thing came down, right? We don't necessarily want that. We want to learn lessons from horizontal scaling here too, so that there's technology and tools where you can let 1,000 flowers bloom, and you can let people go out there and just play with it on their own and make things happen. And then you can try and network those together. That's horizontal scaling. And how do you use your organization's power right now, while you still retain that power, to help with that change? We have a saying at Ushahidi that we use a lot, which is that technology is only 10% of the solution. And I think it's perfect to hear from ActionAid today about what they're doing in Kenya and what Radio 1 did in Haiti around just using simple tools. A lot of times we get caught up in this whiz-bang type of, we need to have the coolest thing, right? Is Twitter integrated? That kind of a question. And it doesn't actually matter. What matters is if you're able to use technology to make whatever it is you're doing more efficient. Because technology is there just to make things more efficient. If it's not making it more efficient, then don't use it. And who was it that said that was the simpler the better? I think that was Krista. And I think I can't agree any more with that. And that you use the simplest tools you can. You don't try and build these complex systems. You don't try and make them massive. You just make something that works. You get traction with it. And then if you can iterate on top of that, that's great, right? And so I think, when we look at this space, when we look at how is the humanitarian industry as a whole reacting to disaster, we're just looking for small successes. Look for little things that are working, and then double down on that. Make that happen more. So, sorry, I lost my point here. So I guess I'd end on this. I'm going to keep it really short because I know we have drinks next. Is that we need to see things like self-organization of using technology not as a threat, but as an augmentation opportunity. It's something that we can use to make everything better. It's going to change things, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we need to be ready for that change as it happens. So that's my kind of final thoughts for the day, and happy to talk through any of them at more length with anybody who'd like.
Great. Thank you.